Huva Iltabaya, Kuopio. I'm presenting this study on chemical reactions of polyurethane spray foam, otherwise known as SPF, from our laboratory in San Francisco, California. I truly wish I could be with you in beautiful Kuopio. Following some installations of SPF, occupants experience odors and irritation many months after application. For sure, not all SPF installations result in odor and irritation. I had SPF installed onto the roof deck of my home attic without any problems. But sometimes there is ensuing and persistent odor and irritation. In this study, we developed some hypotheses as to why. We measured SPF chemical emissions and indoor air concentrations in 5 residences with persistent odor and irritation between 4 and 14 months after application. We tested 2 open cell foams and 1 closed cell foam. SPF, open or closed cell foams, consists of a mixture of 2 components, A and B. The SPF A components were all isocyanates. The SPF B components contained the resin components, including additives such as fire retardants and surfactants, many of which were undisclosed in the manufacturer's safety data sheets as trade secrets. TCPP appears to be the most common SPF fire retardant and was in both of the open cell SPF, but not the closed cell SPF. Air samples were collected in the attic, living space, below the attic, and outdoors using multi-sorbent tubes. SPF bulk samples were collected from the attics and chemical emissions measured in a microchamber according to the ASTM D7706. We know that this microchamber test utilizes dry ultra-zero air, and this may suppress chemical reactions created when the SPF is exposed to humid indoor air, such as those from hydrolysis reactions. Chemical analyses were conducted by thermal desorption, GC mass spec, following US EPA compendium method TO17 for all VOCs greater than 2 micrograms per cubic meter. 4 chemicals dominated the SPF chemical emission rates and indoor air concentrations: allyl chloride, bis-2-dimethyl-aminoethyl ether, otherwise known as BDMAEE, 1-chloro-2-propanol, and tris-1-chloro-2-propyl phosphate, otherwise known as TCPP. BDMAEE and TCPP are both chemicals believed to be contained in the SPF B component, but 1-chloro-2-propanol and allyl chloride are believed to be reaction products related to the fire retardant, such as TCPP. Allyl chloride emissions range from less than 9.6 micrograms per meter squared hour to greater than 1,000 micrograms per meter squared hour. BDMAEE emissions range from less than 3.2 micrograms per meter squared hour to greater than 550 micrograms per meter squared hour. 1-chloro-2-propanol emissions were all less than 9.6 micrograms per meter squared hour. However, as noted previously, the chemical emission rate tests were conducted with dry ultra-zero air, and this may have suppressed hydrolysis reactions. TCPP emissions range from less than 3.2 micrograms per meter squared hour to 450 micrograms per meter squared hour. For exposure guidelines, we utilized 1% of the Cal-OSHA 8-hour PEL, which correlates well with OHIHA CRELs that are formulated to be protective of sensitive individuals. Concentrations exceeding the exposure guidelines are highlighted in red. For allyl chloride in the attic, concentrations exceeded exposure guidelines in 3 of the 4 homes with SPF emissions and 1 home without SPF emissions. In the living space, concentrations exceeded exposure guidelines in 2 of the 4 homes with SPF emissions. For BDMAEE, in the attic, concentrations exceeded exposure guidelines in all 3 homes with SPF emissions. In the living space, concentrations were below the exposure guideline in all 3 homes with SPF emissions. BDMAEE is a sticky molecule. For 1-chloro-2-propanol, while currently there are no exposure guidelines, this attic concentrations range from less than 2 micrograms per cubic meter to 43 micrograms per cubic meter. And the living space concentrations range from less than 2 micrograms per cubic meter to 29 micrograms per cubic meter. For TCPP, while currently there are also no exposure guidelines, the attic concentrations range from less than 2 micrograms per cubic meter to greater than 266 micrograms per cubic meter. And the living space concentration range from less than 2 micrograms per cubic meter to 12 micrograms per cubic meter. We tested 1 home, GA2, twice. Once with an SPF age of 4.3 months and an outdoor air temperature of 20.3 degrees C, and again 8.2 months later with a higher outdoor air temperature of 32.5 degrees C. While emissions are expected to decrease with increasing SPF age, even after an additional 8.2 months of aging, the attic concentrations increased with a 12.2 degrees C increase in outdoor air temperature. The attic concentrations increased by a factor of 5.1 for allyl-chloride, 7.2 for 1-chloro-2-propanol, and 14.5 for TCPP. The attic concentrations of BDMAEE decreased by a factor of 0.6. Temperature is more important than age for SPF chemical emission rates. Both BDMAEE and TCPP are contained in the B-side SPF resins, and the emissions into the indoor air are direct. Allyl-chloride and 1-chloro-2-propanol are not disclosed in any of the manufacturer's safety data sheets and are believed to be TCPP reaction products. The following are some hypothesized chemical reactions. The first hypothesized chemical reaction is a hydrolysis chemical reaction where TCPP forms 1-chloro-2-propanol. As can be seen from the molecular structure of TCPP, each of these 3 chlorinated arms can potentially form 1-chloro-2-propanol through a hydrolysis reaction. The second hypothesized reaction is a metal catalyst chemical reaction where 1-chloro-2-propanol forms allyl chloride. The conclusions from this initial study of SPF are the following. Some SPF installations result in chemical emissions that cause odor and irritation that are expected to persist for decades. Allyl chloride and 1-chloro-2-propanol appear to be hydrolyses-initiated TCPP reaction products. The air concentration of SPF chemicals increased significantly with increased outdoor air temperature. Emissions of allyl chloride, a potent sensory irritant, were observed in the SPF samples from 4 of the 5 homes. Allyl chloride air concentrations exceeded exposure guidelines in attics of 4 of 5 homes and the living space of 2 of 5 homes. Further research is needed to understand the potential chemical reactions of TCPP and the suitability of this chemical as a fire retardant in SPF insulation. Kuopio. I look forward to answering all questions that you post on the Indoor Air 2022 virtual event platform. Kitos.